What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson. And of course, last night there was another episode of HBO's New York Giants version of the offseason edition of Hard Knocks, and there were a lot of big takeaways that we want to go ahead and discuss in today's episode. Of course, we saw the Saquon Barkley negotiations. It's been teased throughout each and every episode, and finally last night we got the full behind-the-scenes look at Joe Schoen negotiating with Saquon Barkley's agent and how the process unfolded, where Saquon apparently negotiated with the Chicago Bears as well and then landed with the Philadelphia Eagles. That was revealed in the episode, and it was interesting. John Mara gave his 2 cents, said Saquon is by far the team's most popular player and that he wouldn't sleep well at night if Saquon ended up in Philadelphia. He also had some opinions about the Giants quarterback room that we're going to get into later on in the episode, and we're really going to talk about that because there was a teaser at the end of the episode. It's not even in the episode, but a teaser for next week's episode, so we're really excited for next week's episode. But it revealed that the Giants had an interest in trading up in the draft for LSU quarterback Jayden Daniels, who now, we all know, went number 2 overall to the Washington Commanders. So one of the Giants' prized targets in the draft, they're going to have to face off against him twice a year for the next several years. Very interesting stuff, and we want to go ahead and dive into this episode, talk about it. Even the Brian Burns thing, I didn't even mention that, but that was discussed in the episode. Seeing how that trade unfolded was really exciting as well. So, been a good show so far, and we want to give you guys our reactions. But before we dive into all that, make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you're listening to Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. And go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, Alex, there was a lot to unpack in that episode. What was your biggest takeaway? And also, how are you doing today, my friend?
Doing pretty good, and yeah, I'm really enjoying the Hard Knocks for the Giants this offseason, getting a lot of really good insight into what this kind of front office is thinking about the future of this team. Now, it's evidence that they looked at both the pass rush and they looked at the offensive line and said to themselves, well, we need upgrades there. They even said if we don't get Brian Burns, we have to go into the draft and get a pass rusher. The thing was, they needed this, you actually saw, they needed this Brian Burns trade to go through so badly because they were waiting to get confirmation from Dan Morgan, and they were losing out on all of the free agents they had on their list, like literally one by one. Tyrod was gone, Robert Hunt was gone, everyone off the board as they were really interested. Of course, Xavier McKinney signs, and Saquon Barkley goes too, but they needed that Burns trade to go through. That was the blockbuster move, right? They paid him big money, and they give up draft capital. Thankfully, it ended up going through, and the Giants end up with a really, really strong pass rush with Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Dexter Lawrence. Really solid young team here. And I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, I think Brian Burns is overrated." I think that what Joe Schoen said really makes a lot of sense in the perspective of they're getting a 26-year-old guy who's on the ascent. Right? This is not a 29, 30-year-old player who we've seen the best of. That is a seasoned veteran. We know what's coming. We may have not seen the best of Brian Burns yet. He's going to play over 900 snaps for us most likely next season. He's going to be a very important piece and variable in this defense. So I do believe it was the right decision because his upside, we may not have seen it just yet. When it comes to Saquon Barkley, I really respect what Joe Schoen did. And I think that despite the fact that John Mara said, I'm not going to be able to sleep well if he goes to the Eagles, Joe Schoen said, hey, I'm not going past this red line. I'm not spending more than I'm comfortable with. I'm not giving him $25 million guaranteed. The actual quote was, a lot of people were misconstruing it. It was really, if I gave him $25 million guaranteed and 12.5 per year, he'd be a Giant today. That doesn't say he was going to do that. It just says that's what they needed to do to get there. Obviously, the Giants came in well below that, and they ended up with Devin Singletary on a much cheaper contract, which I think was the right move long-term for this team because we're not a Saquon Barkley away from a championship. And we need that money to spend in more important pieces. If you bring back Saquon, you don't end up getting John Runyon or Jermaine Lewinor most likely. They actually had to sacrifice on getting Robert Hunt because they had to overspend on John Runyon. They wanted both of those guys, but they couldn't get Robert Hunt. He ended up going for, I think, $17 million per season. And then, of course, they ended up with Runyon at $10 million per season when they had him pegged around 6 to 7 per year. So they had to overpay. They couldn't get Robert Hunt because of it. And then you look at, of course, Illuminor, 2 years, $14 million. Really solid player for that price point. And he's a really high energy, like high character guy. So I think that we're going to get a lot more value than that contract actually indicates personally, especially because he's following Carmen Brasillo over here as the offensive line coordinator for this Giants team. So, looking at what we saw yesterday, free agency, that Brian Burns deal is what made free agency for them. It could have got ugly really fast if they didn't, execute that deal in time. Tyrod Taylor, they wanted to bring him back. He actually was really high up there on their priority wish list. They end up going with Drew Lock, and they say to Drew Lock, hey, the reason that we want you to bring you in is everyone that we bring in here ends up getting paid after. Why? Because they get playing time. Drew Lock, he was never going to be competing for the starting spot, but the Giants estimate that Daniel Jones is going to get hurt at some point. That's what that conversation sounded like to me. They know that Daniel Jones is injury prone, he gets hurt, and he misses time. If you're the Giants right now looking at Daniel Jones, you're saying, Drew Lock, hey, capitalize on this one-year, $5 million deal and use that as leverage to get a bigger contract, which is exactly what Tyrod Taylor did with the Jets, who are a contending team. So, they see themselves as a platform for maybe players that wouldn't get regular starting time to potentially get that time and then leverage it into more profitable contracts. So the quarterback situation already gets kicked off with that narrative. Then you go into the draft situation. You hear them talking about, of course, last week's episode, Drake May, and you hear them talking about conversing with the New England Patriots. And then at the end of this episode, you hear Brian Dable, this is a precursor to next week, and that's kind of the title of this video. Brian Dable said he'd be down to trade for Jayden Daniels. And you guys know how much I love Jayden Daniels. That was a stake to the heart, man. That actually was painful to hear. So reflecting on that, Anthony, your thoughts on kind of the stuff I did discuss, but also the fact that the Giants are so obviously, or were obviously interested in getting a quarterback, that does not leave me thinking they have much faith in Daniel Jones. They got the best weapon for Daniel Jones, but they got a weapon that's going to be here for a minimum of 5 years. It's not really about Daniel Jones. It's about the future of their offense.
Yeah, before I dive into deep on the Jayden Daniels topic, I do want to address some of the other things. I'll say, though, to the Jayden Daniels topic, if you watch that clip in full, the teaser for next week's episode, they said, okay, if we can't get this quarterback here, then we're going to go ahead and take a playmaker, the best one available for Daniels. So it actually revealed what their priorities were. It was number one, get a quarterback of the future. If you can't do that, plan B was to take Malik Neighbors or the best playmaker available. So the Giants' priority list this offseason, everybody said no, their main goal was always to get a playmaker for Daniel Jones. Absolutely not. Completely revealed from Joe Schoen in Hard Knocks in that preview clip. And of course, we'll get more context and more information about it next week. But it was revealed that the priority was quarterback and then playmaker. So Giants settled for Malik Neighbors, which is, again, what we said all offseason long. Incredible consolation prize. An amazing prize to get Malik Neighbors and an elite playmaker with a number 6 overall pick if you couldn't get a quarterback. So not complaining about it, totally happy about it, but it was a little bit disappointing, or it's disappointing once again to see that the Giants were so close to maybe getting that exciting quarterback prospect and unfortunately weren't able to pull it off. But rewinding back to some of the things you said about Brian Burns, one of the things that you mentioned that I did really like, it was something Shane Bowen mentioned, saying, I'm going to play him a ton. He's going to play 1,000 snaps for me, 900 snaps for me. Brian Burns is going to be on the field a lot this upcoming season, and I think that's really important because when you look at the way that he plays and you combine that with the way that Kayvon Thibodeau plays, both of those guys are 3-down edge rushers. They are on the field for 1,000 snaps apiece, and that opens things up a lot to rotate guys in when you need to, but also just to keep that consistency and keep Kayvon pushing the pocket one way and Burns pushing the pocket the other way and collapsing that pocket on a consistent basis. Meanwhile, Dexter Lawrence roaming in the middle of that pocket. So the Giants are building a great defensive line, but one of the crazy takeaways that I had from that whole saga of Brian Burns, first of all, Dan Morgan, what's your problem, dude? Get the deal done early and let the Giants get to business. Second of all, I found it very interesting that when Joe Schoen discussed a potential deal for Brian Burns with Shane Bowen, he said, it's probably going to be Shane Bowen and that's it. We're not going to be able to sign anyone else for you. So they kind of understood that going after Brian Burns meant no Xavier McKinney re-signing, and also meant no signing of a big-time cornerback in free agency. It's going to be Brian Burns, and that's about it. And Shane Bowen said, okay, that's fine, because I think that the productivity from this defensive line will help the defensive backfield and take a lot of pressure off of them, which I do think is an interesting strategy. It's a gamble for sure. We've been talking about it all offseason long, Alex. The Giants rolling out there with this very inexperienced young secondary is a risk. It's a gamble, but it's got that boom or bust quality, and when you combine it with the fact that the Giants' defensive line could boom and could be really good this year, it should make up for any shortcomings in the secondary. If the ball's coming out of the quarterback's hands really quickly because of the pressure, the cornerbacks don't have to guard for that long. They don't have to play their matchups for that long, so they'll be in better position to make plays, and hopefully the Giants won't have a lot of air yards thrown against them because of the productivity of that pass rush. But moving into that quarterback discussion, Alex, that you started to touch on, seeing Brian Dable say that he was willing to trade up for Jayden Daniels tells me a few things. First of all, I thought that we recently saw in the Combine episode, it was Dable who went to Shane and said, I really like Malik Neighbors on film. He's a dog. So it feels to me like the Neighbors pick was a Dable pick. But it also does feel to me that in all of the scenes that we've seen with Shane and Dable, there is a lot of conversation about Brian Dable, what do you want this team to look like? It's like he's picking the ingredients and Joe Shane is going grocery shopping. Joe Shane is bringing him the ingredients for him to put into his stew, basically. So the way that I interpreted it was Brian Dable telling Joe Shane, I would like to trade up and land a quarterback of the future. If not, I want this specific playmaker. And Joe Shane just tried his best to make it happen and cross off the wish list for Brian Dable. So this is Brian Dable's team. This is Joe Shane's team. I don't feel like this is John Mara meddling. John Mara, of course, said that he wasn't going to sleep well at night if Saquon Barkley went to the Philadelphia Eagles. A lot of Giants fans felt the same way. They were like, go anywhere except for Philadelphia. I didn't feel like that was John Mara pressuring Joe Shane to do anything because he said that, and then immediately Joe Shane made the call to Saquon's agent and said, hey, we're out. The price tag is too high. He didn't feel any type of way, and doubling down on that, when the news broke officially in the Hard Knocks clip, Joe Shane said he's going to Philly, and John Mara said something along the lines of, I think we'll be okay. Or Joe Shane said, we'll be fine, and he said, I think so too. So seems like there was no panic button and everything was fine there. But then again, with this quarterback thing, it is really interesting. Alex, I think that this was almost a message from the Giants via Hard Knocks to Daniel Jones. You're on thin ice, put up or shut up year, make or break. How do you feel about that? The fact that the Giants absolutely could have taken certain things out of these episodes and made it seem like they were more pro Daniel Jones than they've come across so far. Do you think that this is in some way the Giants raising the stakes for Daniel Jones and making clear to him, this is your year to perform all the way to your best capabilities, and if you don't, well, you can see now that we have had our internal discussions and you know which way we're moving.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you watched the Hard Knocks last night, I pretty much think he got the message. Like, they are very much considering his future and the future beyond him. They've said it, like, plain as day. He's been injury prone. He's had multiple serious injuries. They cannot trust him. They're telling his backup that he will probably have time to leverage games, starting time, into a more lucrative contract elsewhere next year. Like, he's like, hey, like, I mean, you don't tell a guy that unless you anticipate your starter's going to miss time. You know what I mean? You don't anticipate, giving a backup time to leverage his 1 year contract to a long-term deal elsewhere, unless you think that your Daniel Jones is not going to be playing at some point. So, I do kind of get the feeling that they're thinking beyond DJ. I think it would be a very nice surprise if he just suddenly was able to process things at like 100 miles an hour, but that's been one of his biggest flaws. I think that it's year 6. These are professional talent evaluators. You know what I mean? Joe Shane, Brian Dable are professional talent evaluators. If you don't think that they know what they've seen, let alone 5 years of film, the last 2 seasons watching Daniel Jones, I don't have to tell you, right? I'm not saying that he can't like rise to the occasion and like suddenly eliminate all of these bad habits he's developed over years. But I think that Brian Dable and Joe Shane probably understand that the likelihood of the Giants moving on next year is higher than them keeping Daniel Jones around, because keeping Jones around does unfortunately mean that he comes with a very high cap hit, right? $46 million next year and then $56 million in 2026. That is an unsustainable number. So the only way to create more salary space for yourself, there's 2 ways, right? One, you create void years and you push dead money into the future. And do you really want dead money from Daniel Jones's contract by restructuring it, hurting you when he's not even on the team and you're in the peak of the contracts of Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns and Andrew Thomas? Do you really want that? Absolutely not. That would be the most illogical, dumb thing you can do. This team is not in a championship window. The Eagles created lots of void years into Jalen Hurts' contract to keep the salary cap hit low so they can use a little bit more money now because they're actually able to win a championship right now. That makes logical sense. That I can get behind. The Giants are not in that spot, so restructuring Daniel Jones' contract is absolutely out of the question. The other option is to extend Daniel Jones on a future contract. So you actually take his contract now, you kind of rip it up for the most part in terms of the cap, because you can now, if you extend him, you can take some of that dead money and push it into the future and create more cap space now. But do we really think that the Giants are about to extend Daniel Jones on like a additional 2 years to his current deal? Do we really think that that's going to happen? I'd say the likelihood of that happening is in the negatives, not the positives. So the 2 ways that you can actually operate around Daniel Jones' contract would be the dumbest possible things you could do. With that being said, The only alternative is sticking on his contract right now. The Giants have $22 million in cap space next season, right? And that's not even considering draft picks. So take away $10 million already. You now have $10 million to spend to reinforce this team next year, and you can't really cut anybody because a lot of these cut-worthy guys are not really going to be adding much value to the team. They're not adding much salary space to the team. So you have no money unless you get rid of Daniel Jones and reset that rookie window. You're going to have no ways to improve this roster unless you're hoping that rookies step in and immediately make us a contender. Like, this roster is set up to move on from Daniel Jones after this year. That's just the way that I'm not saying they're going to by any means. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen, but everything that they've said, everything that they've done, everything that they've suggested indicates that they are looking beyond DJ next season, because the cap space makes it look like that. Their conversations make it look like that. The fact that they were willing to trade up for 2 different quarterbacks makes it look like that. I don't know how else to kind of break it down to say, like, everything points in that direction. The only thing stopping that from happening is Daniel Jones putting over 4,000 yards on the football field and like 30 touchdown passes and a couple rushing touchdowns. That is the only possible way that Daniel Jones is the quarterback in 2025, is if he has an astronomically phenomenal season that contradicts everything he's done up to this point. Now, there are no more excuses, right? They added talent to the offensive line. They added receivers. They added a superstar caliber guy in a prospect. We'll see what he actually does. And Malik Neighbors. This is it. This is his chance. He's got all the weapons he needs. He has the protection, hopefully. If he does it, then he does it. If he doesn't, then, you know, the roster is set up to move on from him and reset that rookie window. So I think that in terms of rebuilding, the Giants have done a decent job preparing for the future. But of course, many will be in the comments saying, well, we'd signed him to a contract in the first place. And like, yeah, I get that, but they were really in a tough spot at the time. So I understood why they did it, coming off a playoff win. Obviously it didn't work out, but they'll move on after 2 years and then they'll reset that window and, we'll see what happens. Look, the Giants won 6 games last year, not because of Daniel Jones, but because of Tommy DeVito and Tyrod Taylor. So, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like Daniel Jones came in and won 6 games and stopped us from drafting a quarterback. It was Tommy DeVito that really did that. He came in and won football games for us, and one big one against the Green Bay Packers too. So, I don't know what you're thinking about that perspective though, Anthony, in the sense that I kind of see this roster and they've built it around the idea that if Daniel Jones doesn't take a stupendous leap this year, it is structured to move on from him.
Yeah, and the contract is structured to move on from him as well, as you mentioned. I mean, listen, essentially when the Giants signed him to that contract, they did not sign him to a 4-year deal. Yes, it's a 4-year contract. It was a 2-year deal with a 2-year team option after that. I've said that many times on the show. I've had different writers who've appeared on the show that cover the Giants, Patricia Traina, one of them, agree with us. That was a 2-year contract with a team option, and they have not moved the money around on that deal. They could absolutely free up more cap space for this offseason. If the Giants wanted to, they could have gotten Brian Burns like we saw in that episode and still signed Xavier McKinney if they moved the guaranteed money in Daniel Jones's deal. Why would they not move the guaranteed money in Daniel Jones's deal if they felt like he was still the long-term answer at quarterback? It's because they don't feel that way. They have question marks about that, and he's coming off of this injury, and he's had quite a few injuries. So had they moved the money around and loaded up more guaranteed money in 2025 and didn't keep that out in Daniel Jones's contract, then I'd agree with everybody. They're 100% committed to Daniel Jones, but they did not do that. So they still have the out in Daniel Jones's contract next year. So if he struggles this season, they can cut him with very minimal repercussions and free up, I think, almost $30 or $20 million in salary cap space in 2025. So Daniel Jones is playing on thin ice. He is with his back against the wall, and he does need to perform this season. Like you said, got to see 4,000 passing yards, got to see 30 touchdowns. Otherwise, the Giants could easily make the decision to move on from him next year because of the way that they structure that contract. So it was a 2-year deal with a 2-year team option, not a 4-year deal. And I'm going to round out my thoughts and opinions on Daniel Jones and this quarterback thing here, Alex, by saying something that I've been saying all offseason long. It's become my favorite phrase on this show. It's no longer good enough for Daniel Jones to be good enough. He needs to be great. I've repeated that many times on the show, and I think it's more true than ever. The more information that we get behind the scenes for the Giants and the way that they built this team throughout the offseason and the way that they approach the quarterback position, it is no longer good enough for Daniel Jones to be good enough. He does need to be great because the Giants were looking for great this offseason. They weren't looking for good enough quarterback prospects. And honestly, you guys know I really liked J.J. McCarthy, but had they drafted J.J. McCarthy at 6, that was probably the Giants going with good enough, right? That wasn't getting the guy that we want. That was getting somebody who could step in there and compete at quarterback good enough with J.J. McCarthy. But if they're going for great, they're going for Drake May. They're going for Jayden Daniels. And that has been shown to be what they were doing this offseason. So the Giants are not settling for good enough at quarterback anymore, which honestly should get everybody excited. Daniel Jones supporters, Daniel Jones haters, and everybody in between. Those of you who want to see this football team be really good, the fact that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll are not settling for good enough quarterback play, whether that's from Daniel Jones or someone else, is a great takeaway from this Hard Knock series and really from everything they've done this offseason. Because if Daniel Jones is only good enough next year and they move on from him, everybody should be happy that they're taking that approach. And the fact that they didn't take J.J. McCarthy in the good enough approach, we should all be happy about that. The Giants are no longer settling for good enough at quarterback. They are searching for the next great quarterback. And again, that could be Daniel Jones. They've given him tools at his disposal. He's coming in here with a chip on his shoulder, coming off of a torn ACL. He could absolutely step up to the plate this year and have a great season, and the Giants feel that he is great enough to maintain that starting job. But they're no longer settling for good enough, and I think that's a really, really great thing. Whether you support Daniel Jones or not, you can apply this kind of thought concept and process to him having a successful year, to him having a bad year, however you want to shake it out. J.J. McCarthy versus Drake May, Jayden Daniels. Giants aren't settling for good enough. That's a great thing. When the Giants are striving to be the best team in the league and no longer just the best team that they can put out in the last 5 years, when they're striving to be competing with San Francisco 49ers led by Brock Purdy, Philadelphia Eagles led by Jalen Hurts, Kansas City Chiefs, Mahomes, Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen, all these great teams that have good quarterback play, the Giants are not striving to be in the middle of the pack anymore. They want to be up at the top of the league with those guys, but you have to do that through the quarterback position. So Daniel Jones has his chance here, prove it year. He's had many prove it years, but this really does feel like the final one because of the out in his contract and because of his health question marks and the Giants' interest in adding a quarterback this offseason. So it's going to be a really interesting year, but like I said, they're no longer focused on being good enough. They're focused on being great. So this is actually a breath of fresh air for me. Really refreshing to see the Giants take this approach. Really exciting to see the Giants take this approach. And whether Daniel Jones has a breakout year or not, I'll be tuned in because I'm a Giants fan and I'll be happy. And I'm excited for the future of this team because I do feel more confident now seeing Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll work behind the scenes and not settling at the quarterback position. They're doing their best to improve this roster in every way possible and make it the most competitive team that they possibly can. So that's really my main takeaway, Alex. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that or anything else that you saw in the Hard Knocks episode. I will say they completely glossed over Xavier McKinney. He's barely been mentioned in any of these episodes, and that saga's done now. It seemed like the Giants didn't have any interest in signing him. They didn't even mention him, really. And they didn't show any conversations with Joe Schoen and McKinney's agent. I guess that would be the last topic to really dive into here. Alex, do you have any thoughts and opinions about that? Because I think everybody who's been viewing this channel knows I was really upset to see Xavier McKinney go. But I do think at the end of the day, they probably just didn't have enough money to afford him and really didn't expect him to get the contract that he got.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it still seems like that Joe Schoen was focused on positional value, and he wasn't going to give McKinney 17 mil a year. Like, he never was going to go that far. I think they were hovering around 14 as the max, and they gave him, and then the Packers gave him a big deal. So, yeah, I get why they let him go. I know there was some situations last season where like there was some back and forth between him and Wink Martindale, and there was just things that happened that probably rubbed him the wrong way. And I think that he was a captain on the team, and the fact they didn't give him his money earlier definitely pissed him off. I think he was already going into free agency upset because they didn't respect his value to the team and as a captain and a leader. Meanwhile, they extended Dexter Lawrence and they gave him a bag, and they gave Andrew Thomas a bag, and McKinney was one of their best performers, and they ignored him essentially. So I get why he probably was like, yeah, first opportunity I got to get that big money, I'm out. You know what I mean? Probably happened pretty fast. I almost am willing to say, not willing to say, but I almost feel as though there wasn't that much communication. Like Saquon was like going back and forth with Joe Schoen a lot. I don't even think there was that much communication with him and Joe Schoen, which is why there probably just wasn't that much content to actually put out there for it. It just kind of happened and materialized quickly, and he was gone. And like that was that. So, they go out and they get Tyler Nubin, and hopefully he can step in and fill those shoes.
Hopefully, man. I would love to see Tyler Nubin step up and immediately replace Xavier McKinney's production. That's a tall task, McKinney being a great safety, but Tyler Nubin being a great safety product. So we'll see how it goes. Of course, it's going to be a lot of fun. And guys, we are 1 week away from the start of training camp. stay tuned to Fireside Giants. We're going to have all of that content. I'm not talking just Fireside Giants on YouTube, but Instagram, Twitter, everything about training camp for the New York Giants. We're going to be posting about, giving you our analysis, our takeaways, all the breaking news. Yesterday, I actually learned through the Fireside Giants Instagram that Theo Johnson got placed on the PUP list. I was away doing other things, hadn't seen that he got placed on the PUP list from any of the reporters. Opened up Instagram, Fireside Giants is the one that informs me, crazy enough as it is. Shout out to our great team for putting that together. But yeah, I guess, Alex, before we wrap, if you want to put any last thoughts on Theo Johnson being placed on the PUP list, we weren't planning on talking about that, slipped our mind, here we are. Theo Johnson, not going to be there for the start of camp.
Yeah, sometimes I forget I'm a Giants fan and we can't have nice things. And, it's training camp right around the bend. Of course, the guy falls out of bed, hurts his hip or something. Who knows how he got hurt, but probably working out or doing something. This is not unusual for the Giants. It's not unusual for us as fans to see players get injured when they shouldn't be doing anything except for working out. So hopefully he is not out long term. Hopefully he doesn't miss much time and he's back in a couple weeks and doesn't skip a beat. Obviously you want guys to be there. He's a rookie. He's a young player. We need him to make an impact. We think he can be really, really good. He's a freak athlete at his size at 6'6". So now it's really just about getting him healthy, getting him back into the mix here. But yeah, I was like, oh wow, things are too quiet, and then of course this happens. So it is what it is. Injuries happen, but hopefully they happen more so on the football field in live action than off the field because that's natural. It's kind of unnatural for guys to get hurt not doing anything football related.
Yep, injuries are a part of the sport. Injuries are a part of life. I mean, I can't even play flag football season without getting 3 injuries a year. So, it's everybody. Everybody gets hurt, so you can't hold it against Theo Johnson, like you were saying, Alex. And it's unfortunate to see that he won't be there for the start of camp, but hopefully it's not a severe injury. Hopefully he's back on the practice field as soon as possible. Sometimes, Alex, these PUP list kind of placings, they happen for 3 practices and then boom, the guy's back and you've totally forgot about it. Forgot that it ever happened in the first place. So hopefully that's the case for Theo Johnson. We're definitely going to need him. Giants tight end room is increasingly thin. Maybe we'll talk about that in the next episode if you guys want us to, talking about options at tight end or expectations for the unit, especially with Theo Johnson now hobbled by a hip injury. But that's pretty much going to do it again. Stay tuned. All the training camp content. Can't wait 1 week away right here on Fireside Giants. So make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode and comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you're listening to Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, we'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.